November 1968, Saigon. CIA case officer Robert Keller thought he understood Vietnam. 3 tours, countless briefings. He knew the official playbook. But nothing prepared him for what he saw at 0300 in a fishing village 40 clicks south of the capital. 6 figures rose from the black water of the Mekong, silent as death itself. Faces painted green, no dog tags, no insignia. Carrying suppressed pistols the army didn't officially issue. They moved through that village like ghosts with a kill list. 14 minutes later, they vanished back into the river. Behind them, 3 Viet Cong infrastructure leaders who would never recruit another fighter, never collect another tax, never send another American soldier home in a bag. No shots fired that anyone heard, no witnesses, no paperwork. Leading them was a man Keller knew only by his call sign, __quote, _0__ Senior Chief Roy Bohm's protege. The operator Saigon Station called when they needed a problem to disappear. Permanently. The Viet Cong had a 50,000 pister bounty on his head. They called him Bóng Ma Nước, the water phantom. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Before he became the most feared hunter in the Mekong Delta, he was just a 19-year-old kid from San Diego who thought being a SEAL meant swimming fast and shooting straight. He had no idea he was being recruited for a program so secret. Congress wouldn't learn its true scope for another decade. A program called Phoenix, to understand how young Americans became assassins for the CIA and what it cost them. We have to go back to the jungles of Coronado. To the moment an instructor looked him dead in the eyes and said, November 1967, the Mekong Delta. A place where the water itself seemed to breathe death. CIA Station Chief William Colby sat in a windowless room in Saigon, staring at a map covered in red pins. Each pin represented a Viet Cong infrastructure leader. Tax collectors, recruiters, propaganda chiefs. The invisible army that kept the enemy machine running while American boys bled in the rice paddies. The conventional war was failing. Every general knew it. Every intelligence officer whispered it in the hallways of MACV headquarters. The United States was winning every battle and losing the war. The enemy simply replaced their losses faster than American firepower could create them. But Colby had a different idea. A darker idea. An idea so controversial that decades later, congressional investigators would still be trying to understand its full scope. And what he was about to unleash would terrify the Viet Cong more than any B-52 strike ever could. The program was called Phoenix, in Vietnamese, Phung Hoang, named after the mythical bird that rises from ashes. But this phoenix would not bring rebirth. It would bring something far more terrifying to the hidden leaders of the Viet Cong. And the men chosen to be its talons were the most unconventional warriors America had ever produced, the United States Navy SEALs. But what exactly did these operators do in those midnight raids that the Pentagon classified for over 30 years? What methods did they employ that made even hardened CIA officers uncomfortable? And why did the Viet Cong place bounties on their heads that exceeded those on American generals? The answers would shock even the most hardened military historians. But first, you need to understand the enemy these men were sent to destroy. To understand Phoenix, you must first understand the enemy it was designed to destroy. The Viet Cong infrastructure, known in military intelligence circles as the VCI, was not an army in any traditional sense. It was a shadow government, a parallel administration that existed in every village, every hamlet, every province of South Vietnam. By 1967, American intelligence estimated that over 70,000 VCI operatives controlled the countryside after dark. District chiefs who collected taxes to fund the insurgency. Propaganda cadres who recruited young men to fight. Intelligence officers who identified South Vietnamese collaborators for elimination. Medical personnel who treated wounded guerrillas. Logistics specialists who moved weapons down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. These were not soldiers carrying rifles. They were accountants, teachers, village elders, even Buddhist monks. They wore no uniforms. They carried no weapons during the day. They were invisible to conventional military operations. And they were winning the war while America's generals counted bodies that didn't matter. Every time American forces conducted a search and destroy mission, the VCI knew about it hours in advance. Every time the South Vietnamese government tried to establish control in a village, The VCI assassinated the appointed officials within weeks. Every time American aid arrived to win hearts and minds, the VCI taxed it, stole it, or destroyed it. General William Westmoreland's strategy of attrition was bleeding America dry while barely scratching the enemy's true power structure. The Pentagon was counting bodies, while the VCI was counting converts. Something had to change, something radical, something that would take the war out of the rice paddies and into the shadows where the real enemy operated. But the solution Washington approved would remain classified for decades, and for good reason. The concept emerged from the fertile and morally flexible minds of the Central Intelligence Agency's Saigon station. Robert Comer, a civilian advisor with a reputation for bureaucratic ruthlessness, proposed what he called attack the infrastructure. The idea was elegantly brutal. Instead of chasing guerrilla fighters through the jungle, American forces would identify, locate, and neutralize the civilian leaders who made guerrilla warfare possible. Cut off the head, and the body would wither. In May of 1967, the Intelligence Coordination and Exploitation Program was born. ISEX for short. It would later be renamed Phoenix, a title that sounded more palatable for congressional briefings. The program's official mandate was to coordinate intelligence gathering across all American and South Vietnamese agencies: CIA, military intelligence, South Vietnamese police, provincial reconnaissance units. Everyone would share information about VCI operatives. Everyone would contribute to a master database of enemy infrastructure. But the database was only the beginning. What came next would make the Viet Cong fear the night itself. The real question was what to do with the names once you had them. The official policy offered three options: rally the target to the government side through persuasion, capture the target for interrogation and prosecution, or neutralize the target through military operations. That word, neutralize, would become the most controversial term of the entire Vietnam War. And the men who would execute that word with terrifying precision were already training for missions that no official history would ever fully document. They called themselves SEALs. The enemy would call them something else entirely: water demons. The Navy SEALs had been operating in Vietnam since 1962, but their early missions were limited: reconnaissance, training South Vietnamese commandos, occasional sabotage operations against North Vietnamese coastal installations. By 1966, everything changed. SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2 began deploying platoons directly into the Mekong Delta, the watery labyrinth that the Viet Cong considered their impenetrable sanctuary. The SEALs were given a mission that no other American unit had ever received: direct action against specific individuals, not search and destroy, not area denial, not attrition warfare, targeted elimination of enemy leadership. But before they could become the most feared hunters in Vietnam, they had to transform themselves into something their own mothers wouldn't recognize. The men who volunteered for these missions were unlike any soldiers the American military had ever produced. They had survived basic underwater demolition SEAL training, a 6-month crucible that broke 90% of candidates. They had learned to operate in small teams, without support, deep in enemy territory. They had been taught that unconventional problems required unconventional solutions. And the Mekong Delta was the most unconventional battlefield on Earth. The Delta covered over 15,000 square miles of rivers, canals, swamps, and flooded rice paddies. During monsoon season, the water rose so high that entire villages existed on stilts. During dry season, the mud became so thick that conventional infantry could barely move. Yet what terrified regular army units became the SEALs' greatest weapon. Here's why. The Viet Cong had operated here for decades. They knew every waterway, every hidden trail, every safe house. They had built an underground network of bunkers and tunnels that made the famous Cu Chi tunnels look like amateur construction. They moved by sampan at night, invisible to American aircraft, untouchable by American artillery. Regular army units hated the Delta. The terrain negated every advantage of American firepower and mobility. Helicopters couldn't land in the swamps. Tanks couldn't traverse the rice paddies. Artillery couldn't hit targets hidden under triple canopy jungle. But the SEALs looked at the Delta and saw opportunity. Water was their element. Darkness was their ally. Small unit tactics were their specialty. The very terrain that frustrated conventional forces became the SEALs' greatest weapon. They would become what the Viet Cong had always been. Ghosts in the night, shadows in the water, death that struck without warning and vanished without trace. But first, they had to abandon everything the military had taught them about being soldiers. The transformation began with equipment. SEAL operators quickly abandoned standard military issue gear. The M16 rifle, beloved by Army quartermasters, was considered unreliable in the wet, muddy conditions of the Delta. SEALs preferred the Stoner 63, a modular weapon system that could be configured as a rifle, carbine, or light machine gun. They carried sawed-off shotguns loaded with double-aught buckshot for close-range ambushes. They favored the Swedish K submachine gun, a compact weapon perfect for sampan raids. But the most distinctive SEAL weapon was the Mark 22 Model 0 pistol. The intelligence community called it the Hush Puppy. This 9mm handgun came equipped with an integral suppressor that reduced its report to a whisper. The slide could be locked to prevent even the metallic click of the action cycling. With subsonic ammunition, the Hush Puppy was virtually silent. Its official purpose was eliminating guard dogs. But every SEAL knew the Hush Puppy served a far darker purpose, one that mission briefs never explicitly stated. The appearance of SEAL operators became as unconventional as their weapons. Regulation haircuts disappeared. Beards grew wild. Some SEALs stopped cutting their hair entirely, letting it grow past their shoulders. The transformation was not mere rebellion against military discipline. It served a tactical purpose. In the darkness of the Delta, silhouettes mattered. The distinctive profile of a helmeted American soldier was instantly recognizable to enemy sentries. A SEAL with long hair, wearing a bandana or local hat, moving barefoot through the water, could be mistaken for a Vietnamese fisherman until it was far too late. Face paint became an art form. Standard military camouflage used brown and green patterns designed for European forests. SEALs developed their own techniques, covering every inch of exposed skin with dark green or black grease paint. Some painted their entire faces a single shade of green, creating the appearance of men without features. Masks of war. The Viet Cong began calling them men with green faces. It was not a description. It was a warning. Uniforms became whatever worked. Blue jeans, black pajamas identical to those worn by Vietnamese peasants, tiger-striped camouflage purchased from South Vietnamese Special Forces. Some SEALs operated in nothing but shorts and ammunition belts, their bodies slicked with mud for camouflage. Boots were often abandoned entirely. Experienced SEALs claimed they could feel tripwires and pressure plates through their bare feet. They could move more silently through water without the weight and suction of jungle boots. They could sense vibrations in the mud that warned of approaching enemy. To conventional army officers, the SEALs looked like pirates, criminals, savages. To the Viet Cong, they looked like demons. And now these demons had a target list, provided by the most secretive program in the entire war. The Phoenix program gave these demons a target list. Provincial reconnaissance units, commanded by CIA case officers, developed intelligence on VCI operatives in each district. Informants provided names, captured documents revealed networks. Interrogations of defectors exposed safe houses and meeting schedules. This intelligence flowed to the Phoenix coordination centers established in every province. Analysts compiled dossiers on each identified VCI member. Photographs when available. Known associates. Typical locations. Security arrangements. The dossiers were then prioritized. Category A targets were senior officials, district chiefs, military commanders, intelligence officers. Category B were mid-level operatives, tax collectors, recruitment cadres, logistics coordinators. Category C were lower-level supporters, couriers, lookouts, safe housekeepers. Category A targets were often assigned to SEAL platoons. The mission orders were clinical, capture or neutralize. But the reality was anything but clinical. Here's what actually happened on those midnight raids. A typical Phoenix mission began long before the SEALs entered the water. Intelligence specialists briefed the team on the target. Aerial photographs showed the village layout. Agent reports described guard positions and patrol schedules. Previous reconnaissance missions, conducted by Vietnamese provincial reconnaissance units or SEAL scouts, provided information on waterway approaches and landing zones. The SEALs studied their targets' habits with the intensity of predators learning their prey. When did he sleep? Who shared his hooch? Did he post sentries? Did he keep weapons nearby? How would he react to contact? Mission planning consumed days of preparation for operations that might last only minutes, but all the planning in the world couldn't prepare them for what waited in the darkness of the Mekong. The team assembled their equipment with obsessive attention to detail. Every piece of gear was taped to prevent noise. Faces were painted. Weapons were checked, rechecked, and checked again. Radios were tested on secure frequencies. Extraction plans were reviewed, and backup extraction plans were memorized. After dark, the SEALs moved to the insertion point. Sometimes they traveled by helicopter, rappelling into clearings miles from the target to avoid alerting the enemy. Sometimes they used light SEAL support craft, heavily armed boats that could navigate the shallow waterways of the delta. Sometimes they simply slipped over the side of a Vietnamese junk that had been converted into a mobile base. And then they entered the water. What they experienced next broke many men before they ever saw combat. Moving through the Mekong Delta at night was an experience that broke many men before they ever saw combat. The water was warm, thick with sediment, alive with creatures that American boys from Iowa and Ohio had never imagined. Leeches attached themselves to any exposed skin within minutes. Water snakes, some highly venomous, swam past in the darkness. Crocodiles hunted the same channels the SEALs used for infiltration. The mud at the bottom could swallow a man to his waist if he stepped wrong. The vegetation above concealed tripwires, booby traps, punji stakes coated with excrement to cause infection. And the darkness was absolute. On moonless nights, SEALs could not see their own hands in front of their faces. They navigated by compass, by memorized terrain features, by the subtle feel of current and vegetation. Yet this hellscape was exactly where the SEALs wanted to be, because the enemy never expected Americans to hunt them here. They moved in single file, each man maintaining contact with the operator ahead through touch alone. Hand signals were useless in the blackness. Communication happened through pressure, through tugs on equipment, through a silent language developed over months of shared operations. Speed was sacrificed for silence. A SEAL patrol might travel only a few hundred yards in an hour, pausing constantly to listen, to feel, to sense the presence of enemy. The approach to the target required patience that bordered on inhuman. SEALs would position themselves around a village or hooch and wait, sometimes for hours, allowing the normal sounds of night to resume, allowing any alert sentry to relax, allowing the target to believe that the darkness held nothing more threatening than mosquitoes and memories. And then, without warning, the water demons struck. The moment of action came without warning. In some operations, the entire assault lasted less than 30 seconds. SEALs burst through doorways simultaneously from multiple entry points. The target was seized before he could reach a weapon. Zip cuffs secured his hands. A gag silenced his screams. Within minutes, the team was moving back toward the water, their prisoner dragged between two operators. These were the clean operations. The ones that matched the official mission reports filed at Phoenix coordination centers. But many operations were not clean at all. And what happened in those moments remained classified for decades. Sometimes the target resisted. Sometimes guards reacted faster than anticipated. Sometimes the intelligence was wrong, and the team found itself facing a reinforced bunker instead of a village hooch. In those moments, the violence was extraordinary. SEALs were trained to dominate close-quarters combat through overwhelming aggression. When surprise was lost, speed and ferocity replaced stealth. Shotguns cleared rooms in single blasts. Grenades silenced bunker positions. The hush puppy whispered its quiet work. The term "5" covered a multitude of outcomes. After-action reports used precise military language. "6", "7", "8". The reality beneath those phrases was war at its most intimate and terrible. But even this was not the darkest chapter of Phoenix. The most controversial Phoenix operations involved preemptive elimination. Some VCI targets were deemed too dangerous to capture. Their security was too heavy. Their intelligence value was outweighed by the risk of the operation, or their continued existence posed an unacceptable threat to American forces and Vietnamese allies. For these targets, the mission order was simple: neutralize, do not capture. SEAL teams developed techniques specifically for these assignments. Long-range observation posts, called __quote_9__, allowed teams to study target patterns for days before acting. Snipers with suppressed rifles eliminated sentries without raising alarms. Specialized ordnance, including modified grenades that could be thrown into windows, ended targets without requiring building entry. And then there were the operations that left no evidence at all. Operations that officially never happened. A VCI official who disappeared from his village might have defected, might have fled to Cambodia, might have fallen victim to local criminals. His absence was noted, his replacement was warned, but no American fingerprints remained. These operations existed in a classification category so restricted that most Phoenix personnel never knew they occurred. The SEALs who conducted them rarely spoke of the details, even to each other. The silence was not ordered, it was simply understood. But the enemy understood something else entirely. They understood terror, and they documented it obsessively. The Viet Cong response to Phoenix was equal parts terror and adaptation. By 1968, captured enemy documents revealed a systematic fear of VCY officials were ordered to change sleeping locations randomly. Security details were doubled, warning networks extended their coverage areas, but nothing seemed to stop the men with green faces. A Viet Cong district chief might move to a new safe house, only to find SEALs waiting when he arrived. A tax collector might vary his travel routes, only to be seized from a sampan in the middle of a canal. A recruitment cadre might surround himself with armed guards, only to watch those guards fall silently before he even reached for his weapon. The psychological effect was devastating. And the enemy documents proved it. Interrogations of captured VCI revealed that some officials had stopped sleeping entirely, driven to hallucinating exhaustion by the fear that any night might be their last. Others abandoned their positions and fled to Cambodia. Still others surrendered to South Vietnamese authorities, preferring imprisonment to the terror of waiting for the water demons. The Viet Cong responded with a bounty system. Cash payments for any SEAL captured or confirmed eliminated. The amounts varied by region, but some SEALs learned they had prices on their heads exceeding 50,000 piasters, more than the bounties offered for American colonels. It was a badge of honor, worn silently. But the SEALs' deadliest challenge wasn't the assault, it was getting out alive. The extraction phase of Phoenix operations was often more dangerous than the assault itself. A SEAL team moving through enemy territory with a prisoner, potentially wounded, possibly with their position compromised, faced every hazard the Delta could offer. Viet Cong quick reaction forces might be pursuing. Booby traps that had been avoided on the infiltration now blocked the withdrawal route. The prisoner might struggle, shout, or attempt escape. And the water that had hidden the SEALs' approach now seemed filled with enemies. Light SEAL support craft crews earned reputations as some of the bravest men in the Delta. They navigated narrow canals in armed boats that drew enemy fire like magnets, extracting SEAL teams from situations that appeared hopeless. Helicopter pilots from the Army's 164th Combat Aviation Group flew into landing zones surrounded by tracers, hovering in the darkness while wounded SEALs were lifted aboard. The bonds formed during these extractions transcended service rivalry. They were bonds written in blood. Navy SEALs, Army helicopter crews, and Vietnamese provincial reconnaissance units became brothers in a war that official military structures pretended did not exist. The scale of Phoenix operations defied later attempts at historical accounting. Between 1968 and 1972, the program reported over 81,000 Viet Cong neutralized. Of these, over 26,000 were reported as terminated. The remainder were captured, rallied to the government, or otherwise removed from the infrastructure. But these numbers told only part of the story. The real impact was measured in fear. Critics would later claim these numbers were inflated by corruption and incompetence. South Vietnamese officials allegedly added personal enemies to target lists. Provincial units supposedly counted ordinary civilians as VCI to meet quotas. Intelligence failures led to the targeting of innocents. The SEALs who participated in Phoenix had their own perspective on accuracy. Their operations were based on intelligence that had been vetted through multiple sources. Their targets were photographed, documented, and confirmed through agent networks before any mission was authorized. The men they captured or eliminated were not random civilians but identified enemy operatives whose activities had been observed and recorded. When SEALs made mistakes, they remembered them. When intelligence was faulty, they reported it. When operations went wrong, they analyzed failures with brutal honesty. They were professionals conducting warfare at its most precise level, and their tools were as specialized as their missions. The weapons of Phoenix operations became legendary among military collectors and historians. The Stoner 63 light machine gun, designed by Eugene Stoner, who also created the M16, was a modular marvel that SEALs modified obsessively. The standard 15-round magazines were replaced with 150-round drum magazines. Barrels were shortened for close-quarters combat. Handguards were modified to prevent burns during sustained fire. The weapon's reliability in wet conditions made it ideal for the Delta. SEALs emerging from chest-deep water could open fire immediately without the cleaning and preparation that the M16 required. In ambush situations, a single Stoner operator could lay down firepower equivalent to an entire rifle squad. But firepower was only part of the equation. Silent elimination required different tools entirely. The Ithaca 37 shotgun, slam fire modified, became a room-clearing nightmare. By holding the trigger while working the pump action, SEALs could empty 5 rounds of double-aught buckshot in under 2 seconds. At close range, the pattern spread covered doorways completely. The Smith & Wesson Mark 22 Hush Puppy represented the cutting edge of silent elimination technology. Its suppressor reduced the pistol's report to approximately 39 decibels, quieter than a normal conversation. Lockback slides prevented even the metallic sound of the action cycling. SEALs carried these pistols in custom-made rigs that allowed drawing while swimming. The weapons were coated with corrosion-resistant finishes that standard military issue did not receive. Each operator maintained his hush puppy with the devotion of a surgeon maintaining instruments. Yet even the most advanced weapons meant nothing without communication. And the SEALs developed something that bordered on telepathy. Communication equipment underwent similar adaptation. Standard military radios were too heavy, too unreliable in wet conditions, and too easily intercepted. SEALs worked with Navy electronic specialists to develop compact radio systems that could be sealed against water immersion. Encryption devices were miniaturized and ruggedized for field conditions. The AN/PRC-90 radio became a favorite for its combination of range and portability. Modified versions included waterproof housings and flexible antennas that could be concealed during movement. But the most critical communication tool was often the simplest. Hand signals and touch codes allowed SEALs to coordinate complex operations in complete silence. A squeeze pattern on a teammate's arm could communicate enemy positions, movement directions, or abort signals without any transmission that enemy radio intercept stations might detect. This silent communication vocabulary was never officially documented. It existed only within the Brotherhood, and that Brotherhood paid a price that no metal could acknowledge. The personal toll of Phoenix operations remained hidden behind security classifications and military stoicism. SEALs did not discuss what happened in the darkness of the Mekong. Not with families, not with friends, not with the psychologists that the Navy eventually provided for returning operators. The transformation that Phoenix required was not easily reversed. Young men who had been trained to hunt human beings in the night, who had learned to move silently through water while controlling their heartbeats and breathing, who had looked into the eyes of targets moments before those eyes closed forever. These men did not simply return to civilian life unchanged. Some found that the skills which made them lethal in the Delta made normal existence almost impossible. The hypervigilance that detected enemy movement in the jungle detected threats in shopping malls and crowded streets. The emotional control that allowed them to function during operations left them unable to connect with wives and children. The memories that military debriefs never asked about surfaced in dreams that no medication could suppress. Others found that Phoenix had prepared them for careers where darkness was an asset. Intelligence agencies recruited former SEALs for operations that continued long after Vietnam ended. Private military contractors sought operators who understood unconventional warfare at its most intimate level. Law enforcement agencies valued the discipline and tactical expertise that Phoenix missions had developed. The Phoenix program did not end in 1972. It evolved into something that would shape American warfare for generations. The congressional investigations of 1971 forced Phoenix into public awareness. Representative Ogden Reed of New York demanded answers about assassination programs being conducted by American personnel. William Colby, by then the director of CORDS, the program that oversaw Phoenix, was called to testify before the House Operations Subcommittee. His testimony was carefully constructed to acknowledge concerns while defending necessity. Colby stated that Phoenix was designed to capture VCI for prosecution under Vietnamese law, not to assassinate enemy operatives. He acknowledged that some targets had been eliminated during operations, but characterized these as combat actions, not premeditated executions. He emphasized that American advisors provided intelligence and support, but that Vietnamese personnel conducted actual operations. The distinction between combat and assassination became the subject of intense debate. A debate that was never truly resolved. Critics noted that Phoenix missions specifically targeted individuals based on intelligence dossiers. Targets were identified by name, located through surveillance, and approached with predetermined outcomes in mind. This pattern, they argued, constituted assassination regardless of whether the target was eliminated during a military operation. Defenders countered that wartime operations against enemy military and political leadership had always been legitimate. Targeting a VCI district chief was no different from targeting an enemy general. The method of elimination, whether artillery, airstrike, or ground assault, was irrelevant to the legality of the operation. Congressional hearings produced no legislation restricting Phoenix-style operations. The program continued until American withdrawal made it logistically impossible. The SEALs who had served as Phoenix operators received no medals that mentioned the program by name. But the Phoenix template was far from finished. Its legacy would reach far beyond Vietnam. Military theorists studying counterinsurgency warfare concluded that targeted operations against enemy infrastructure were more effective than conventional attrition strategies. The Phoenix model, refined and adapted, became a template for future conflicts. In El Salvador during the 1980s, American advisors helped establish intelligence networks that identified leftist guerrilla leadership for targeted operations. In Colombia, specialized units tracked drug cartel commanders using techniques pioneered in the Mekong Delta. In Iraq and Afghanistan, high-value target operations against al-Qaeda and Taliban leadership followed Phoenix principles of intelligence fusion and surgical elimination. The SEAL teams themselves evolved into the premier special operations force for these missions, and one operation would prove exactly how far they had come. SEAL Team 6, officially the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, was established in 1980 to conduct counter-terrorism operations. The unit's classified mission set included the same individual targeting that Phoenix had pioneered. The operators who built SEAL Team 6 included veterans who had learned their trade in the canals and rice paddies of the Delta. When Osama bin Laden was eliminated in Abbottabad, Pakistan, in May of 2011, the operation bore unmistakable Phoenix fingerprints. Intelligence fusion from multiple sources identified the target. Specialized operators trained for precision raids conducted the assault. The mission objective was unambiguous. The SEALs who participated in that operation were the professional descendants of the men who had painted their faces green and slipped into the Mekong darkness 40 years earlier. The tactics had evolved. The technology had advanced. But the fundamental approach remained what Phoenix had pioneered, and the moral questions remained equally unresolved. Did the program constitute legitimate warfare against an enemy military infrastructure, or did it cross the line into assassination? Were the civilians eliminated alongside VCI targets acceptable collateral damage, or were they victims of war crimes? Did the intelligence failures that led to wrongful targeting invalidate the entire program, or were they inevitable errors in an imperfect war? Veterans of Phoenix operations answered these questions with the certainty of men who had faced impossible choices. They had seen what the Viet Cong infrastructure did to Vietnamese civilians who cooperated with the government. The assassinations, the mutilations, the terror that kept entire villages paralyzed with fear. The VCI was not an innocent political organization, but an enemy military structure that used terror as its primary weapon. Targeting that infrastructure was not murder, they insisted. It was the only warfare that actually worked. The methods were brutal because the enemy was brutal. The operations were secret because exposure would have compromised intelligence sources and methods. The operators were unconventional because conventional forces had proven incapable of fighting the Shadow War. Phoenix worked. The Viet Cong infrastructure never recovered from the losses inflicted between 1968 and 1972. The program bought time for Vietnamization and American withdrawal. If the war was ultimately lost, the failure lay with political leadership in Washington, not with the operators who had done everything asked of them and more. But when these operators came home, they found a country that wanted nothing to do with what they had accomplished. The SEALs who served in Phoenix came home to a country that did not want to know what they had done. The anti-war movement had declared all Vietnam veterans to be criminals or victims. The nuances of special operations warfare were irrelevant to protesters who saw only the body counts and the bombing campaigns. The men who had conducted the most effective counterinsurgency operations in American military history were lumped together with the officers responsible for My Lai. Most Phoenix veterans responded with silence. They did not defend themselves in public debates. They did not write memoirs explaining their missions. They did not seek recognition for operations that remained classified. They simply absorbed the contempt of a society that did not understand what they had sacrificed or what they had accomplished. The silence was not shame. It was the professionalism that Phoenix had demanded from them all along. Special operations personnel understood that public discussion of tactics, techniques, and procedures compromised future operations. They knew that detailed accounts of Phoenix missions would identify methods that enemies could counter. They accepted that some knowledge must remain within the Brotherhood, shared only with those who had earned the right to understand. Decades would pass before the historical record began to acknowledge what the SEALs had achieved in the Mekong Delta. And when those documents finally emerged, they revealed something extraordinary. The documents that eventually emerged from classification revealed an extraordinary operational record. SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2 had deployed over 153 officer and enlisted personnel to Vietnam between 1962 and 1972. These small teams had conducted thousands of operations, from reconnaissance patrols to prisoner snatches to direct action missions against fortified enemy positions. 49 SEALs had given their lives in Vietnam. Countless others carried wounds that would affect them for the remainder of their lives. But the enemy casualties they had inflicted were staggering. Conservative estimates credited SEAL operations with over 800 confirmed enemy eliminated in action. Hundreds more were captured and provided intelligence that compromised entire Viet Cong networks. The psychological impact on enemy morale was impossible to quantify but unmistakably significant. Captured enemy documents described the SEALs in language that bordered on supernatural. Water demons, green-faced devils, ghost soldiers who cannot be heard or seen until it is too late. No American unit in Vietnam was more feared by the enemy. No American unit suffered fewer casualties relative to the damage it inflicted. No American unit demonstrated more clearly that unconventional warfare could achieve what conventional operations could not. The Phoenix program officially ended in 1972, but its spirit lived on in the men who had served it, and those men would shape every generation of SEALs that followed. Many Phoenix veterans remained in the SEAL teams, rising to senior positions where they shaped the next generation of operators. They brought the lessons of the Mekong to training programs at Coronado and Little Creek. They instilled in young SEALs the understanding that special operations warfare was not about heroics, but about professionalism, patience, and precision. The tactics developed for Phoenix became the foundation of modern SEAL operations. Small unit infiltration techniques refined in the Delta canals were adapted for desert and urban environments. Intelligence fusion methods pioneered for VCI targeting evolved into the targeting cycles used against terrorist networks. The equipment modifications that individual SEALs had improvised became standard issue for future operators. Even the psychological selection for SEALs changed because of what Phoenix had revealed about human limits. The men who could function effectively in the darkness of the Mekong, who could control fear and fatigue while conducting operations that would haunt most humans forever, possessed psychological characteristics that could be identified and selected for. BUD/S training became increasingly focused on mental resilience and emotional control, qualities that Phoenix had proven were essential for targeted operations. The final verdict on Phoenix depends entirely on perspective. To anti-war activists and human rights advocates, the program represented everything wrong with American intervention in Vietnam. It was assassination masquerading as military operations. It was state terror deployed against a civilian population. But to the men who served, Phoenix was something else entirely. To military professionals and counterinsurgency theorists, Phoenix was the most effective program of the entire war. It demonstrated that targeted pressure on enemy infrastructure could achieve what massive conventional operations could not. It proved that small units of highly trained operators could have strategic impact far exceeding their numbers. To the SEALs who served in Phoenix, the program was simply the job. They had been asked to do what no one else could do. They had accepted missions that others would have refused. They had operated in conditions that would have broken ordinary men. They had accomplished their objectives with a professionalism that set standards for future generations. The moral complexities of Phoenix were questions for historians and philosophers. The operators had been given targets and orders. They had executed both with precision and skill. They had brought their teammates home alive when possible and honored their memories when not. That was the job. That was what SEALs did. That was what made them legends. The Mekong Delta has changed little since the 1960s. The water still flows brown with sediment through channels that have existed for centuries. The rice paddies still stretch to horizons broken only by palm trees and village hooches. The fishermen still work their nets at dawn and dusk, just as their grandfathers did when American boats patrolled these same waterways. But the memories of what happened here persist. Vietnamese who lived through the war still speak of the men with green faces, though the details have blurred into legend over 5 decades. American veterans who visit on heritage tours sometimes recognize terrain features from operations they conducted as young men. The names of villages that once appeared on Phoenix target lists now appear on tourist brochures. Time has smoothed the sharp edges of memory, but the legacy endures. The terror that gripped VCY officials every night, waiting for the water demons, has faded into historical footnote. The young Americans who painted their faces and slipped into the darkness have become old men, their stories often untold even to their own children. The operational records that documented Phoenix missions remain partially classified, their full scope still unknown to the public. But the legacy endures. Every SEAL who undergoes training at Coronado stands in a direct line of succession to the men who pioneered special operations in the Mekong. Every targeted operation against terrorist leadership applies lessons learned in the rice paddies and canals of the Delta. Every time American policy requires the surgical application of force against specific enemies, the Phoenix template provides the model. The program that officially did not exist became the foundation for modern special operations warfare. The men who served in Phoenix deserve to be remembered accurately. They were not criminals conducting unauthorized operations. They were professional soldiers executing authorized missions against a legitimate military target. They operated under rules of engagement that were classified but not illegal. They reported to a chain of command that extended to the highest levels of American government. They were also not superhuman heroes beyond moral judgment. They were young men placed in impossible situations who made decisions that would haunt some of them for the rest of their lives. They witnessed things that no training could prepare them for, and did things that no memoir could fully describe. They were, in the end, exactly what their country asked them to be. Quiet professionals who did the dirty work while their countrymen debated whether the war should be fought at all. Silent warriors who took the fight to an enemy that had mastered the art of hiding among civilians. Ghosts in the night who proved that darkness belongs to those willing to embrace it. The Phoenix program asked the impossible of these men. They delivered. And when the history of American special operations is finally written without classification restrictions, the SEALs who served in Phoenix will be recognized for what they were: the most effective unconventional warriors America ever produced. The men who proved that small units of dedicated professionals could change the course of wars. The operators who set standards that future generations would struggle to meet. The men with green faces. The water demons of the Mekong. The phoenix that rose from the ashes of a war their country tried to forget. This was the dark truth of the Phoenix program. This was what the SEALs did in the midnight raids. This was the secret that the Pentagon classified for decades. Now you know. And you understand why the Viet Cong feared the water more than they feared the bombs.